The sirens were getting closer, and I could hear Roger's voice from the hallway, desperate and pleading with someone on the phone. My hands shook as I held the envelope from the lawyer's office, the one that had arrived that morning while he was out. Inside were documents I wasn't supposed to see for another 6 months, maybe longer if his plan had worked. The metallic taste of shock filled my mouth as I read the words again. Complete guardianship. Incompetent to manage affairs. Recommended institutionalization. That's when I heard his key in the door, and I knew everything was about to explode. But let me back up. 3 months earlier, none of this had happened yet. 3 months earlier, I was just Margaret Walsh, 62 years old, living in what I thought was a comfortable marriage in Phoenix, Arizona. Our house on Camelback Road had a view of the mountain, and every morning I'd watch the sun paint it orange and pink while I made coffee. Roger would kiss my cheek before heading to his office downtown, same routine for 28 years. We weren't rich, but we were stable, or so I believed. The first time my back really went out, was during a Sunday barbecue at our daughter Linda's house. I bent down to pick up our grandson's baseball, and something in my lower spine just gave. The pain was blinding, electric, shooting down my left leg until I couldn't stand. Roger rushed over, all concern and gentle hands, helping me to the car. At the ER, he held my hand while they ran tests. Speaking to the doctors in hushed tones, I couldn't quite hear through the fog of pain medication. That should have been my first clue. He took charge of everything after that. My prescriptions, my physical therapy appointments, even my conversations with the doctors. At first, I was grateful. The pain made it hard to think straight, and Roger seemed so competent, so caring. He'd always been the organized one anyway, handling our finances, our taxes, the big decisions. I was the artist, the dreamer. He was the practical one who kept us grounded. What I didn't know was that he was also the liar, the manipulator, the man who saw my injury not as a crisis to help me through, but as an opportunity. My back injury became the center of our lives. Roger insisted I needed rest, needed to stop straining myself. When I suggested going back to my pottery classes at the community center, he'd shake his head with this sad smile. "Too much bending, Margaret. You'll hurt yourself again." When I wanted to meet my sister Clara for lunch, suddenly my medication schedule made it impossible. The pills made me drowsy at odd times, he said. And he couldn't have me driving in that condition. I remember one particular afternoon when Clara called. I answered the phone in the kitchen, and she sounded so excited. "There's this new gallery opening downtown, Mags. They're featuring local ceramicists. You should submit your work. Remember those blue vases you made last year? They'd be perfect." I felt a flutter of excitement, that old creative spark trying to ignite. But then Roger appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. He stood there, coffee mug in hand, just watching me with that expression I'd come to recognize but couldn't quite name. Something between concern and calculation. "I don't know, Clara. I'm not really producing anything new right now." "Because of your back," Roger interjected, loud enough for Clara to hear. "The doctor said rest is essential for healing." He walked closer, placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy. Maybe in a few months, when she's stronger. After I hung up, he kissed my forehead. "I'm just looking out for you, Margaret. You know that, right? You push yourself too hard. I look back now and I want to shake that version of myself. I want to scream at her to wake up, to see what was happening. But pain does strange things to your mind. It makes you dependent. It makes you grateful for any relief, any help." And Roger was always there, offering both. The thing about isolation is that it happens so gradually, you don't even notice the walls going up around you. One canceled lunch becomes 2, then 5. Your sister stops calling as much because you're never available. Your daughter gets tired of making plans you can't keep. Pretty soon, your whole world shrinks down to just your husband and your pain, and you can't remember what life felt like before. I believed with everything in me that if I just tried harder, if I was more patient, if I pushed through the pain and made more effort, things would get better. That's what I told myself every morning when I woke up to Roger already gone, a note on the counter about my pill schedule for the day. That's what I thought when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd balanced our checkbook or looked at a bank statement. He'd set up all the bills on autopay, he said. Didn't want me stressing about it. Stress makes pain worse. Margaret. Medical fact. Let me handle the boring stuff. And I did. God help me. I let him handle everything. You know that feeling when you're in a pool and you suddenly realize you've drifted into the deep end? That moment of panic when your feet can't touch bottom anymore? That's what it felt like the day I asked Roger about our savings account. We'd been married almost 3 decades. I knew roughly what we had, or I thought I did. But when I mentioned wanting to withdraw some money to help Linda with her new business, Roger's face went cold. We don't have that kind of cash lying around, Margaret. Your medical bills have been expensive. But our insurance covers most of it, I said. I remember saying that, remember the confusion in my voice. There are deductibles, co-pays. The physical therapy isn't fully covered. We've been burning through savings faster than you realize. The way he said it made me feel stupid, irresponsible, like I was a child who didn't understand how money worked. I dropped the subject, but something small and uncomfortable had lodged itself in my chest. A splinter of doubt I couldn't quite dislodge. I sacrificed more than money, though I didn't understand the full extent of it yet. I sacrificed my independence, my confidence, my connection to the world outside our house. I stopped driving because Roger convinced me the medications made it unsafe. I stopped seeing friends because coordinating around my pain levels and medication schedule became too complicated. I stopped making pottery, stopped painting, stopped doing the things that had always made me feel like myself. Research proves that 58% of crimes against seniors are committed by family members. I read that later, after everything fell apart, and it made my stomach turn. I was one of those statistics. My own husband was systematically dismantling my life, and I was helping him do it. Money kept disappearing, not in obvious ways. Roger was too smart for that. But little things added up. The new car he bought, supposedly at a discount through a friend. The investment opportunity he mentioned in passing, just a small amount to help a buddy's startup. The home repairs that seemed to cost twice what I remembered them being worth. Every time I questioned something, he had an answer ready. Always reasonable. Always delivered with just enough condescension to make me doubt myself. You're not thinking clearly, Margaret. The pain medication affects your memory. Do you really think I'd do anything that wasn't in our best interest? And I'd back down, every single time. My body was failing me in ways I didn't understand. The pain medications made me foggy, disconnected from reality. I'd lose chunks of time, wake up not remembering going to bed. Roger said it was normal, just the drugs doing their job. But sometimes I'd find things moved in the house, bills I didn't remember paying, appointments I apparently agreed to but couldn't recall making. I started keeping a notebook, writing things down, small things at first. What pills I took and when, what I ate, who I talked to. It sounds paranoid, I know, but something in me was starting to wake up. Starting to fight back even though I couldn't articulate what I was fighting against. The notebook became my lifeline to reality. I'd hide it under my mattress like a teenager with a diary. Every morning, I'd read the previous day's entries, trying to match them against my memories. More and more often, there were gaps, entire conversations I'd supposedly had that I couldn't recall. Doctor's appointments that appeared on my calendar but not in my mind. One entry scared me more than the others. Wednesday, April 12th. Roger said we had dinner with the Hendersons tonight. I don't remember going. Found receipt in my purse for Olive Garden. Why can't I remember? The scariest part was how normal it all seemed from the outside. To our daughter, to our friends, to anyone who saw us together, Roger was the devoted husband caring for his sick wife. And I was the grateful spouse, lucky to have such a patient, loving partner through this difficult time. Nobody saw how he controlled every aspect of my life, How he answered questions directed at me during doctor's appointments. How he'd placed himself between me and every financial decision, every social interaction, every piece of independence I might have claimed. I think the only person who sensed something was off was my sister Clara. She'd call and Roger would answer, give some excuse about why I couldn't come to the phone right then. I was resting. I was at therapy. I'd had a bad pain day. After a while, her calls became less frequent. I found out later she thought I was pulling away from her, that I didn't want to maintain our relationship anymore. That's what isolation does. It cuts you off so completely that even the people who love you stop reaching out. The turning point, the thing that should have snapped me out of it, came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because Tuesday was my grocery delivery day, one of the few tasks Roger still let me handle. I was putting away cereal when I found the bank statement. It had been misfiled with the pantry items, probably fell out of Roger's briefcase when he set it on the kitchen counter. I almost didn't look at it. Almost just put it in his office like a good, obedient wife. But something made me unfold it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that splinter of doubt that had been growing in my chest for months. The balance made no sense. We should have had close to $80,000 in savings. The statement showed $12,000. I stood there in my kitchen, cereal box still in hand, trying to make the numbers add up. Trying to find the reasonable explanation Roger would inevitably provide. But $68,000 doesn't just evaporate, not without leaving a trace. My hands were shaking when I heard his car in the driveway. I shoved the statement back where I'd found it, my heart hammering. For the first time in our marriage, I felt afraid of my husband. Not physically afraid. He'd never raised a hand to me. But afraid of what his reaction would be if he knew I'd seen it. Afraid of the disappointment in his voice, the way he'd make me feel foolish for questioning him. I didn't mention the statement. Not that day, not the next week. But I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Started noticing things. Like how Roger's phone was always face down. How he'd step outside to take certain calls. How he'd started coming home later from work, always with explanations that sounded just plausible enough. A late meeting, drinks with clients, traffic on the I-10. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that I was just being paranoid, that the pain medications were making me suspicious and irrational. That's what he'd say if I confronted him. I knew it. And part of me agreed with the version of Roger in my head. But the bank statement haunted me. $68,000 haunted me. I stopped taking my evening pain medication. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. But I started palming the pills, flushing them later. The pain came roaring back, fierce and demanding. But with it came clarity. My mind started to clear, like fog burning off a windshield. And with that clarity came horror at what I'd allowed to happen to my life. The first night without the full dose of medication, I lay awake for hours. The pain in my back was sharp and insistent, but my mind felt sharper too, clearer, like I'd been living underwater and had finally surfaced. I could think in straight lines again, could follow a thought from beginning to end without losing the thread halfway through. I stared at the ceiling and mentally cataloged everything that had changed since my injury. Not just the obvious things like my restricted mobility or abandoned hobbies. The subtle shifts. How Roger now opened all the mail before I saw it. How he'd taken over every household task, even the ones I was perfectly capable of doing. How he spoke about me to others in this tone of patient martyrdom, as if caring for me was this noble burden he'd shouldered. I couldn't remember the last time I'd gone anywhere alone. Couldn't remember the last real conversation I'd had with my daughter without Roger nearby, monitoring, interjecting. Couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision about my own life without consulting him first. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Questioned whether your memories and perceptions could be trusted? That's where I was. Trapped between the reality I was starting to see and the reality Roger had constructed for me, unable to trust my own mind enough to know which one was true. That's when I stopped doing my morning walks. It seems like such a small thing, but those walks had been mine. My time to think, to breathe, to exist outside the four walls of our house and the confines of my failing body. But one morning, I just couldn't make myself lace up my shoes. The weight of everything, the confusion and fear and doubt, it pressed down on me until I couldn't move. I sat on the edge of our bed, shoes in my lap, and realized I'd stopped caring for myself in every way that mattered. I'd stopped fighting, stopped questioning, stopped existing as anything other than Roger's wife, Roger's patient, Roger's burden. That's the day I decided something had to change. I didn't know what yet, didn't have a plan. But sitting there with my unlaced shoes, I made a promise to myself. I was going to find out what happened to our money. I was going to take back some piece of my life, even if it killed me. The collapse came on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were when my physical therapist came to the house. Except that Thursday, she didn't show. I called the office, confused, and was told that my sessions had been canceled 2 weeks prior, by my husband. I was still processing that information, still trying to understand why Roger would cancel my therapy without telling me, when I felt it. A tightness in my chest, spreading like wildfire. The room tilted sideways. I reached for the kitchen counter, but my hand closed on air, and then I was falling, the tile floor rushing up to meet me. The impact knocked the breath out of me. I remember lying there, cheek pressed against the cold tile, watching dust motes dance in a shaft of afternoon sunlight. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't work. My left arm had gone numb. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. Alone on my kitchen floor while my husband is God knows where, doing God knows what. I woke up in the hospital. Not in a room, but in the hallway. Later I learned the ER had been overwhelmed, every bed full. A nurse with kind eyes and tired features was checking my vitals. She smiled when she saw me awake. "Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. What happened? Severe dehydration? Low blood pressure? Malnutrition? When's the last time you ate a proper meal, honey?" I couldn't answer that, couldn't remember. Roger had been making my meals, pre-portioned and scheduled around my medications. But had I actually been eating them? The days blurred together in my memory. "Where's my husband?" I managed to ask. The nurse's expression shifted, became carefully neutral. "We've been trying to reach him. Do you have another contact we could call?" The fact that Roger wasn't there, that he hadn't answered the hospital's calls, planted something dark and cold in my chest. In 28 years of marriage, through every crisis and emergency, he'd always been there. Always. Unless his devotion had been a performance. Unless everything I believed about our marriage was a lie. My sister Clara came instead. She'd been listed as my emergency contact once upon a time, before Roger had systematically isolated me from her. The nurses must have dug deep into old records to find her information. When she walked into my room, I started crying. Not delicate tears, but huge gasping sobs that hurt my ribs and made the monitors beep in alarm. She held me and let me fall apart. Didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. Didn't demand explanations for why I'd been so distant, so unavailable. Just held me and stroked my hair like she used to when we were kids. "You're so thin," she whispered, and I heard the break in her voice. "Mags, what's happened to you?" Roger finally showed up 6 hours later. He had excuses, explanations. His phone had died. He'd been in a meeting. He'd come as soon as he got the messages. But I watched him talk to the doctors and nurses, watched him perform concern and devotion, and I saw it clearly for the first time. He was lying. About something. Maybe about everything. I watched him touch my hand, watched his mouth form words of worry and care, but his eyes were calculating something. Running numbers, assessing damage. This wasn't the face of a frightened spouse who'd almost lost his wife. This was the face of someone whose plan had hit an unexpected snag. 34% are afraid of their partner's reaction. I read that statistic later and recognized myself in it immediately. That fear had kept me paralyzed, kept me silent, kept me compliant, even as my life disintegrated around me. But lying in that hospital bed, Watching Roger charm the medical staff while avoiding my eyes, the fear began to transform into something else: anger. The nurse who'd first helped me, the one with kind eyes, came back after Roger left to get coffee. She adjusted my IV and then, very quietly, said something that changed everything. "Your prescriptions. Has anyone reviewed them with you recently? Because some of these medications, in these combinations, they shouldn't be taken together. They can cause confusion, memory issues, dependency." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" She glanced at the door, lowered her voice even more. "I'm saying you might want to ask your doctor for a complete medication review. And maybe ask why your husband picked up these prescriptions when they weren't what your doctor originally prescribed." My blood went cold. She continued, her words careful but urgent. "I've been a nurse for 23 years. I've seen this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. Your chart shows you should be recovering, getting stronger. But your husband keeps reporting deterioration, keeps requesting increases in medications that sedate rather than treat." Her hand tightened on mine. "I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that something here doesn't add up. After I was discharged, Clara insisted on driving me home. Roger protested, said he had everything under control, but Clara shut him down with a look I'd never seen from my gentle peacemaking sister. She'd always liked Roger, always said I was lucky to have him, but something had shifted in the hospital. She'd seen something that made her protective, fierce. The drive home was silent at first. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Phoenix blur past. Everything looked different now, sharper somehow. The medications had dulled more than just my pain. They dulled my entire perception of the world. Clara finally spoke when we stopped at a red light. "That nurse pulled me aside," she said quietly. "Told me things about your medications, about how Roger's been handling your care." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Mags, why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know," I whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind. I thought it was all me, the confusion, the memory loss, everything. He made me believe I was the problem." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not the problem. You never were." Her voice cracked. "I should have pushed harder, should have insisted on seeing you alone, should have trusted my gut when something felt off. You couldn't have known. I barely knew myself. But that was the thing. I was starting to know." With every hour that passed without those extra medications Roger had been giving me, my mind cleared a little more. And with that clarity came rage. We stopped at the pharmacy to pick up my actual prescribed medications, the ones my doctor had ordered before Roger had apparently been changing them. That's where I met Sarah. Sarah was maybe 40, with gray streaking through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She was picking up medication for her mother, and we got to talking while waiting. I don't know why I opened up to her. Maybe because she was a stranger, someone who couldn't judge me based on who I used to be. Maybe because the medication fog was finally lifting and I needed to hear my own voice say the words out loud. "I think my husband has been drugging me." She didn't look shocked, didn't tell me I was being dramatic or paranoid. Instead, she asked careful questions. How long had I been on these medications? Did I know what our financial situation really was? When had I last seen my own medical records? Every question revealed another gap in my knowledge, another area where I'd surrendered control without even realizing it. By the time we left the pharmacy, Sarah had given me her number and something more valuable, validation that I wasn't crazy, that what I was experiencing had a name: financial abuse, medical abuse, coercive control. I started investigating, quietly, carefully, while Roger thought I was resting or too drugged to pay attention. I found documents he'd hidden in his office, bank statements showing steady withdrawals, money being moved to accounts I'd never heard of, life insurance policies taken out in my name, with him as the sole beneficiary, emails discussing my deteriorating condition with doctors I'd never met. The investigation became my secret mission. Every afternoon, Roger would leave for work, kissing my forehead and reminding me to take my medications. I'd nod obediently, wait for his car to disappear down the street, then spit the pills into the toilet and get to work. His office had always been off limits. "My space, Margaret," he'd say with that patronizing smile. "You understand, right? I need somewhere organized, somewhere your clutter won't interfere with important documents." I'd accepted it then. Now I understood it was another control tactic, another way to keep me from seeing what he was hiding. The file cabinet wasn't even locked. He'd grown that confident in my compliance, that certain I was too drugged and confused to be a threat. Inside, I found a folder labeled Margaret Medical. My hands shook as I opened it. There were doctor's notes I'd never seen, correspondence about my condition that painted me as far more impaired than I actually was. Roger had been calling my doctors between appointments, reporting symptoms I didn't have, behaviors I'd never exhibited, telling them I was becoming paranoid, aggressive, increasingly confused. He was building a case, documenting my supposed decline, creating a paper trail that would support the guardianship petition. It was methodical, calculated, terrifying in its thoroughness. And then I found the guardianship petition. He'd already started the legal process to have me declared incompetent, to take complete control of my finances, my medical care, my life. The hearing was scheduled for 3 months away. The petition itself was devastating. Page after page of Roger's carefully constructed narrative about my decline. How I couldn't manage basic tasks, how I'd become confused and disoriented, how I needed 24-hour supervision for my own safety. He'd gotten statements from neighbors who'd seen me looking frail and disoriented, not knowing I was that way because of medications he'd been giving me. He'd documented every stumble, every forgotten conversation, every sign of the dependency he'd created. It was masterful, really. A complete character assassination disguised as loving concern. I sat in his office, holding those papers, and something inside me that had been dying finally caught fire. Not the hot, explosive anger you see in movies. Something colder, harder, more dangerous. He wanted me incompetent? He wanted me helpless? Fine. I'd give him exactly what he expected, right up until I didn't. I started recording everything. My phone had a voice memo app I'd never used. I figured out how to set it to record and slip it into my pocket during conversations. Every call with the bank, every discussion about my health, every moment when Roger revealed his true nature, thinking I was too drugged to remember. The evidence piled up. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to the recordings, hearing Roger's voice say things I'd convinced myself I must have misheard or imagined. Hearing him tell the bank that I was mentally declining, that I needed to be removed from our accounts. Hearing him discuss my treatment with doctors, emphasizing my confusion, my dependency, my inability to make rational decisions, building a cage around me, 1 bar at a time. But the bars worked both ways. Every piece of evidence was a weapon I could use later. Every recorded conversation was proof of what he'd done. I was meticulous, obsessive even. Dated everything, backed it up in 3 different places, created a trail he couldn't erase. It was empowering in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't helpless, wasn't just a victim waiting to be saved. I was gathering ammunition, preparing for a war Roger didn't even know was coming. Clara became my co-conspirator. She'd come over for coffee and Roger would hover, watching us with barely concealed suspicion. But we were good. We talked about recipes and her grandkids and the weather, while passing notes under the table like teenagers. She helped me open a new bank account he didn't know about, helped me redirect some of my Social Security to it. Small amounts at first, but it added up. One afternoon, Clara brought her famous lemon bars. Roger loved those, always made a show of complimenting her baking. While he was in the kitchen making tea, she slipped me a small flip phone. "Burner phone," she whispered. "He can't track it. My number's programmed in. Call me any time, day or night." I tucked it into my bra, the only place I was certain Roger wouldn't find it. That phone became my lifeline. Late at night, when he was asleep, I'd lock myself in the bathroom, turn on the shower for noise, and call Clara. We'd strategize, She'd update me on what she'd learned, who she'd talked to, what resources were available. She was the one who found the domestic abuse hotline, the one who connected me with support groups, the one who reminded me over and over that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening to me had a name, had patterns, had solutions. "I'm so proud of you," she told me one night. Her voice was thick with emotion. "You're fighting back. You're saving yourself." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, and meant it. He isolated me from everyone, but he couldn't break us. Not completely. "That's what sisters are for," she replied. "We don't give up on each other. Ever." I started eating properly again when Roger wasn't watching. Started exercising in secret, rebuilding strength I'd lost. The pain was still there, probably always would be, but I learned to manage it without the cocktail of medications Roger had been feeding me. My mind cleared more every day, and I planned. Sarah, the woman from the pharmacy, turned out to be a paralegal. She couldn't represent me legally, but she knew people who could. She connected me with an attorney who specialized in elder abuse, a sharp woman named Patricia, who listened to my story without interruption and then said 2 words that nearly made me cry. "We'll fight." Patricia was everything Roger wasn't. Direct where he was manipulative. Honest where he was calculating. She laid out exactly what we needed to prove, what evidence would hold up in court, what battles we could win, and which ones we'd have to concede. "This won't be easy," she said during our second meeting, her office overlooking downtown Phoenix. "He's been building his case for months. But you have something he doesn't expect. What's that? You're not actually incompetent. And when you walk into that courtroom clear-eyed and articulate, when you present this evidence in your own words, the judge is going to see the truth." Her smile was fierce. "We're going to destroy him, Margaret. Legally, thoroughly, and completely." The day I confronted Roger, I chose carefully. Not our home, where he held all the power and familiarity. Not somewhere public where he could perform for an audience. I chose a small cafe on the outskirts of Phoenix, in a neighborhood where nobody knew us. Neutral ground. I told him I needed to talk, that it was important. He came, probably thinking I wanted to discuss my health or sign something he'd prepared. He had no idea I'd spent 2 months building a case against him. We sat across from each other in a back booth. I'd ordered coffee I had no intention of drinking, just to have something to do with my shaking hands. Then I slid the folder across the table. "What's this?" He was already suspicious, defensive. "Open it." He did. I watched his face as he recognized the bank statements, the recorded transcripts, the guardianship petition with my attorney's response attached. Watched the color drain from his cheeks as he realized I knew everything. "Margaret, this isn't what it looks like, isn't it? Because it looks like you've been systematically draining our accounts while convincing me I'm losing my mind. It looks like you've been changing my medications to keep me compliant and confused. It looks like you've been preparing to have me declared incompetent so you could take everything." His mouth opened and closed. For once, he had no smooth explanation, no reasonable justification. He was caught, and he knew it. "I can explain," he finally managed. "I don't want your explanations. I want you to know that I've filed for divorce, that I've reported you to the medical board for prescription fraud, that I've given all of this evidence to the police and my attorney. I wanted to look you in the eyes while your world fell apart, the way you've been trying to destroy mine. You can't do this. You're not well enough to. You need me. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over. But those scars can make you stronger if you let them." I leaned forward, my voice steady and cold. "I never needed you, Roger. I needed the man I thought you were. But he never existed, did he? He tried to argue, to manipulate, to convince me I was making a mistake. But I stood up, left money for the coffee on the table, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I walked away from something that was hurting me, and it felt like flying. The legal battle wasn't quick or easy. Roger hired lawyers who tried to paint me as a mentally unstable woman, having a breakdown. They pointed to my medical records, the medications, my isolation as proof that I couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions. But Patricia was better. She had the recordings, the evidence of financial fraud, the testimony of my doctors about how my medications had been changed without their authorization. She built a case so airtight that Roger's attorneys eventually advised him to settle. The courtroom moments are burned into my memory. Roger's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, tried to discredit me on the stand. "Mrs. Walsh, isn't it true that you've been on heavy pain medications for over a year? That you've experienced memory loss and confusion?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Because my husband was giving me medications that weren't prescribed. Medications that caused those exact symptoms. Now that I'm only taking what my doctor actually prescribed, my mind is perfectly clear." The lawyer tried a different angle. "You've been isolated from friends and family. Isn't that a sign of depression, of mental decline?" "It's a sign of abuse," I said, my voice steady. "My husband systematically cut me off from my support system, so I'd have no one to turn to when he tried to take control of everything I owned. That's not mental illness. That's survival under impossible circumstances." The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, watched everything with an expression that grew increasingly grim. When Patricia presented the recording of Roger telling a doctor I was incompetent while I stood in the next room perfectly lucid, the judge actually flinched. He lost access to my finances completely. Our shared accounts were frozen and audited, revealing years of theft and manipulation. He was forced to return what he'd stolen, though some of it was already gone, spent on things I'd never know about. The legal system took notice. Roger was charged with fraud, with prescription tampering, with elder abuse. Our daughter Linda, who'd initially sided with her father, sat through one day of testimony and left the courtroom in tears. She called me that night. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I should have seen it. He fooled everyone, honey. That was his gift." Linda's voice broke. "I watched him on that stand today, and it was like seeing a stranger. All those years I thought he was taking care of you. I thought you were lucky to have him, and he was. He was." Her voice dissolved into sobs. "I know, baby. I know." The trial was public enough that our social circle learned the truth. The friends who'd admired Roger's devotion, who'd pitied him for having a sick wife, they saw him clearly for the first time. Some called to apologize, others just disappeared, embarrassed by their own blindness. I didn't care much either way. I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece, and their opinions no longer had power over me. When the judge delivered the sentence, Roger cried, actually cried in court, begging for mercy, claiming he'd only been trying to protect me, to help me. The judge wasn't moved. "Mr. Walsh, you systematically abused your wife's trust and health for financial gain. You isolated her, drugged her, and attempted to have her declared incompetent to cover your tracks. That's not protection. That's predation." He got 3 years. Not enough for what he'd done, but enough. Enough for me to breathe. Enough for me to rebuild. Enough for justice, even if it wasn't perfect. 6 months after Roger went to prison, I moved. Couldn't stand to live in that house anymore, to walk through rooms where he'd slowly poisoned my life. I found a small adobe casita in Scottsdale, near the art district. It had a studio space perfect for pottery. Linda helped me move. We worked in mostly silence, packing away a life I no longer wanted. When we found my old pottery tools, buried in the garage behind Roger's golf clubs, she started crying. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it, Mom. All those times you canceled on me when you seemed distant. I thought you were choosing him over us. I didn't realize you didn't have a choice." I pulled her close. "You see it now. That's what matters." My new place became a sanctuary. I filled it with color, with plants, with all the things Roger had always said were too messy or impractical. I hung my old paintings, the ones he'd made me store away. I set up my pottery wheel and spent hours relearning the feel of clay between my fingers. The first night alone in my new home, I walked through every room, touching the walls, opening every cabinet and drawer. "This is mine," I kept saying out loud. "This space is mine. No one is monitoring me. No one is drugging me. No one is controlling when I eat or sleep or speak." I made myself a cup of tea at midnight, just because I could. Stood on my patio in my pajamas at 2 a.m, looking at the stars, feeling the cool desert air on my skin. Simple things. Revolutionary things. Linda called the next morning. "How was your first night, Mom?" "Perfect," I told her, and I meant it. The house was small. The furniture was mismatched, and I'd slept terribly because my body was still adjusting to proper medications. But it was perfect because it was mine, chosen by me, controlled by me, a space where I could finally be myself without fear. "I'm coming over for lunch," Linda said. "I'll bring Thai food, your favorite, not Dad's." We laughed at that. For 28 years, our takeout orders had been dictated by Roger's preferences. I'd forgotten I even had my own favorites. The first bowl I threw was lopsided and clumsy, my hands remembering but not quite executing what my mind recalled. I almost crushed it back into a formless lump, frustrated with my own rustiness. But then I looked at it, really looked at it. The uneven rim, the wobbling base. The visible fingerprints in the clay. It was imperfect, but it was mine. Made by my hands, in my space, on my terms. I kept it, fired it, glazed it in a deep cobalt blue that reminded me of freedom. It sits on my kitchen windowsill now, holding paper clips and hair ties. A reminder that perfect isn't the goal. Authentic is. The pain was still there. Some things can't be undone, but I learned to manage it without the medications that had clouded my mind. I found a good doctor, a woman who actually listened to me, and together we developed a treatment plan that didn't involve dependency or confusion. I started teaching pottery classes at the community center. Just a few hours a week, but it was mine. The students were mostly other women my age, and we'd work with our hands and talk about our lives. More than one admitted to similar experiences, husbands or family members who'd tried to control them, diminish them, erase them. "We need to watch out for each other," I told them, "because the system doesn't always protect us. We have to protect ourselves." Sarah, the woman from the pharmacy who'd been my unlikely angel, became a real friend. We met for coffee weekly, and she introduced me to her mother, who'd been through something similar. We formed an informal support group, women who'd survived abuse and come out the other side. Life became simpler, but in a good way. I learned to enjoy solitude, to appreciate the quiet moments. Learned that peace doesn't mean the absence of pain, it means the presence of choice. The freedom to make my own decisions, even small ones, felt revolutionary. I reconnected with Clara in real ways, no more surface conversations monitored by Roger. We could be sisters again, could laugh and argue and support each other without barriers. She apologized for not pushing harder when I'd pulled away, and I forgave her because isolation is designed to look like choice from the outside. On Sundays, Linda and I had brunch. Just us, no agenda, no performing for Roger's benefit. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her business struggles, her marriage, her fears about repeating patterns. I listened and offered what wisdom I could. One morning, about 8 months after everything fell apart and came back together, I woke up and realized I was happy. Not the performance of happiness I'd mastered during my marriage, but real, bone-deep contentment. I made coffee, walked out to my small patio, and watched the sunrise paint the desert. This was enough. This was everything. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. It's about recognizing when someone is deliberately separating you from the people who love you. Isolation as a tactic, it's more common and more insidious than most people realize. It doesn't start with locked doors or obvious threats. It starts small. A comment here about how your sister is always so dramatic, isn't she exhausting? A suggestion there that maybe you should skip the book club because you've been so tired. Little seeds planted that grow into walls. The abuser positions themselves as your protector from the world, when really they're protecting their control from outside interference. They monitor your phone calls, explain away your absences to friends, speak for you in social situations until you forget how to speak for yourself. Here's what I want you to understand. Isolation serves a purpose. It makes you dependent on the abuser for all social contact, all emotional support, all validation of your reality. When you have no outside perspective, you can't reality check their version of events. You start to believe their narrative because it's the only one you hear. Watch for these signs. Your partner insists on being present for all your conversations, becomes upset when you make plans without them, criticizes your friends and family until you stop seeing them, controls your transportation or finances in ways that limit your mobility, monitors your phone or social media, or makes you feel guilty for wanting time with others. If someone truly loves you, they want you to have rich, full relationships with others. They encourage your friendships, support your family connections, give you space to be yourself outside the relationship. Control masquerading as care is still control. I also learned about financial isolation, which often accompanies social isolation. Roger convinced me he was handling our money because he cared, because I was too sick to manage it. But what he was really doing was creating dependency, ensuring I couldn't leave even if I wanted to because I had no access to resources. Everyone, regardless of age or health status, should maintain some financial independence. Have your own account. Know where your money is. Review statements regularly. Understand your assets and debts. Don't sign things you haven't read. Don't accept explanations without verification. And here's something crucial. Abusers don't just isolate you physically and financially. They isolate you from your own sense of reality. They convince you that your memories are faulty, your perceptions are wrong, your instincts can't be trusted. This is called gaslighting, and it's devastatingly effective. When you start to doubt your own mind, you become completely dependent on the abuser to tell you what's real. That's the goal. That's the trap. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you find yourself constantly confused or questioning your own experiences, that's a red flag. Keep a journal. Write things down when they happen, so you have a record that can't be altered by someone else's revision of events. One of the hardest things to accept is that the system doesn't always protect us. I was lucky. I had evidence, a good attorney, a judge who understood the dynamics of elder abuse. But many don't. Many are dismissed as paranoid or unstable, especially when they're older, especially when they have health issues. That's why we have to protect ourselves and each other. Learn the warning signs. Trust women when they tell you something is wrong, even if they can't articulate it clearly. Create spaces where people can talk about these experiences without shame or judgment. And if you recognize yourself in my story, please know this: it's not too late. It's never too late to reclaim your life. You deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care, not control and manipulation. You deserve to make your own choices, even if they're mistakes. You deserve to exist as a full person, not as someone's project or possession. The path out isn't easy. It requires resources, support, courage, but it's possible. I'm living proof. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I know it was heavy, probably brought up things you'd rather not think about, but sometimes we need to sit with the uncomfortable truths to protect ourselves and the people we love. I'm curious, where are you listening from? What time is it there? I love imagining all of you out there, in different cities and time zones, sharing this moment with me. If this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar or know someone who has, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe someone who needs to hear this will stumble across it at exactly the right moment. I want to ask you something, and I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Roger differently? Do you think the justice system did enough? Sometimes I wonder if I should have pushed for a longer sentence, and other times I think about whether I could have handled it without involving the courts at all. There's no right answer, but I'm genuinely interested in your perspective. If you're not subscribed yet, please consider it. I share stories like this one, real experiences from real people, because I believe in the power of breaking silence. Every subscription helps build a community where we can talk about the things that matter, the things that hurt, the things that heal. I want to recommend 2 other videos if you're interested in similar stories. There's one about a woman who discovered her adult children had been stealing her pension for years, and another about recognizing financial abuse in families. Both are linked in the description. They might give you additional insight or just remind you that you're not alone in whatever you're facing. Until the next story, take care of your heart, and remember, your reality is valid. Your instincts are trustworthy, and you deserve better than someone who makes you doubt both of those things. Be well, all of you, and thank you for listening.